up with the no battery. It's not allowed.
Are we live now?
Am I on? You're on. See.
Something just happened. Hang on.
Well, we can just adjust for each that's here.
How many do you need? Two?
How is there no one from the public?
Heather, did you need batteries?
I think I do. Okay. I mean, I was just.
Are we live?
Yep.
Perfect.
Oh, I don't know.
Alrighty, well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. We're going to start off our Tuesday, January 28th
Sorry.
Select Board meeting. We have a quorum and the meeting is called to order right now at 6:31 and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alright, do we have any amendments to the agenda? We were gonna have a discussion here with the town attorney about historic district ordinance amendments. She's not here yet, so I would say that we just move that until she arrives, if that works for folks. Other than that, I don't have any additional amendments to the agenda either. So, anything from anyone else? Okay, so we'll just move that. Public comment, I don't see anyone here tonight, so no public comment. And then we're gonna move into old business. So we're gonna skip historic district ordinance amendments right now until the town attorney arrives. But we're gonna jump here into the Durham Historic District Architectural Survey budget discussion. So we were all forwarded this request. The Durham Historic District Commission is requesting $10,000 for the architectural survey. They sent along, and we have it in our agenda packet, this kind of scope of work. You know, if we all recall, they came to our meeting, talked about the need, had the questions about what the scope and scale were. They wrote up this written report, submitted it to us. You know, we followed up on, one of the things we followed up on this is like, we're having the reevaluation done, and all of this data is likely, most if not all of this data is going to be, or these data are going to be collected as part of that reevaluation. And so with that happening in 2027, personally, I'm a little hesitant to pay for it to happen in 2026. You know, the reevaluation company isn't willing to do the paperwork of putting this in that karma system that the commission talked about. But in my mind, that $10,000 based off of what we have here, that was going to be used to hire a consultant who would then recruit 25 volunteers, have them go out and do all the data collection, come back, and then the consultant would enter it into the karma system on the website. And in my mind, knowing that there's only like 340 or 360 buildings, I'd be more apt to say wait until we get the reevaluation done. Just take those buildings that have a construction date of prior to 1965 and then take that set and see what the consultant needs from us at that point. So if they have all this money set aside for their time to coordinate, that's going to be cut down a lot if we just already have this taken care of. So I just would be interested to hear other people's thoughts.
So if there's part of this that applies to the existing district in Southwest Bend is that problematic still
I
to
think
the
that this
staff?
is. I think that discussion is going to be in the ordinance here. Jeez.
Well, I know it's gonna be part of the ordinance, but is the properties in there, do they need any further evaluation to complement the ordinance that
My
Or
understanding is that
contemplating
this
changing?
architectural survey is designed to evaluate the properties regardless of whether they're in the current district or not, and it would be the same evaluation process.
No,
Yeah.
I agree, and what I'm leading up to is that would we wanna do a smaller effort now for the existing district, just to complement the changes to the ordinances, so that that is clear as to what staff and the various boards do with the existing properties that are already on the register, I'll say, or already known to us. Forget the rest of them, right? I agree. The rest of them, wait till 2027. But is there a subset of this money that we should apply just to that little area down the street here? And that's really my only question about the whole thing and what I've thought about when
I think there's only like 3 or 4 buildings. that
and maybe
meet
it doesn't
that.
matter, is really
Well,
what it comes down to.
the way that things currently exist is that all of the homes that are in the historic district are subject to the historic district requirements.
So if we change
so-
those, then,
And so it's not just the ones that are already on the register or named for the register. It's actually right now, currently, the way that this is. And I don't know if that changes based on what we accept for
and
a
it,
draft.
and it will. I mean, so maybe that's really my answer, is that
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be done. If
Well-
we
Yeah,
already-
so
if
maybe
they're already
after we
known
get through
entities,
this
yeah.
conversation,
Yeah,
maybe
let's,
that
we'll hop
answers.
over to,
Okay, all right, that's fine.
we'll hop back to the historic district ordinance amendment now that our attorney is here. Because the architectural survey, based off my understanding of what it doesn't care whether your building's in a district, whether it's not, whatever, it's just surveying all buildings that are from before 1965.
No, I
Yeah,
get it,
so.
I get it.
Well, let's hop back to the old business now of historic district ordinance amendments. So we have the copy here. And we'll let Kristen, we always do this, like Kristen gets here and we immediately like, are you ready to go? Like,
Ready to go.
start. I hope everyone reviewed this in advance. I really like the looks of it. I think it does a really good job of taking feedback we've heard from the legal side, feedback we've heard from people who are part of the Historic District Commission, and also our feedback, and I think that this blends things well. So, Kristen, I can hand it off to you to provide us with any additional information, or if we want to go by section and tell us why things look the way they do here.
Yeah, I mean, let's just start, I know the board has talked about this a little bit too, but just structurally, just so everyone understands, there are 2 provisions in the existing ordinance that deal with historic resources. I'll just use the broad category of that. And there's section 5.14, which it sort of resembles what we have in the new version in terms of listing certain types of buildings or structures that we deem to have historic value. And it sort of leaves it hanging there, because it doesn't say, okay, well, what do you do with these buildings? What's our process for reviewing them? Who reviews, some sort of project related to these things? So just as it stands, section 5.14 is pretty problematic because it doesn't really accomplish anything in terms of those types of buildings. And then we've got Article 12 today, which does establish the Southwest Bend Historic District, as well as the Historic Commission that is, pretty standard in terms of other towns' ordinances where you have a historic district and you have a historic district commission whose job is to review projects that are located within the district, whether it's work to be done to an existing building or possibly demolishing or moving the building. And,
the basis of that portion of the ordinance really does come from the Department of Interior standards, which is, your basic underpinnings of a historic district. So that piece of things is sort of standard as it sits in Article 12. But the problem is a couple of things. Number one, I think what you were probably just touching on when I walked in, it appears as though there hasn't really been a recent architectural survey of that district or of the town in general. And you really need to have that in order to have a functioning historic district. that's sort of really grounded in fact and makes sense. And then beyond that, you think of a historic district really as being cohesive. A bunch of historic properties tight, close together. And your goal is not only to maintain the sanctity of those properties, but also to sort of maintain the look and feel and historic qualities of the whole area. And right now, this is a turning point for me and my logic about this. I had thought, let's keep a historic district, and then we'll have a different process for other historic properties outside of the district. But when I learned that there are really only a few contributing structures in the district, and they are not right up close together necessarily, I'm not sure I see the point to have a district, because the district, again, if you look at a town like Kennebunk, I've worked with theirs a lot, for instance, the idea there, again, is you're reviewing all the projects in the district, even if it's not on a contributing structure necessarily. And this ordinance today specifically exempts all of that. So it's only historic properties within the historic district that are getting that quality of review from the Historic District Commission. Yes, in the
Okay.
existing ordinance. So at that point, it's like, well, if you're not treating it as a district and applying the standards throughout, regardless of the property, why have a district in the first place?
Well, and if I can interject, to be fair, our comprehensive plan from 2018 suggests getting rid of districts as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's another thing to.
No, and that's super important, right? Because our zoning ordinance has to comport with the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan doesn't really seem to support the concept of a historic.
I'm pretty sure it says, the comprehensive plan says to remove districts in Durham, if I remember correctly. So I just wasn't
That's
sure,
right.
like, are we out of, like, is our ordinance currently out of line with the comprehensive plan, like, and what that means for the community, if they're saying no districts and we're saying we still have one?
Right. So the way that would be processed is if someone wanted to have a project in the historic district and they were refused a certificate of appropriateness by the commission, they could challenge not only the basis for that decision, but the whole underpinnings, the whole ordinance, because the ordinance doesn't comply with what the comprehensive plan said about not having districts. Not to mention, you know, again, when you have sort of an onerous historic district, you want to have a good public policy purpose for that district. And again, I'm not sure I'm still seeing that. So,
Well, to me, to like the untrained eye, if you don't mind me interjecting really
Yeah.
quickly, I think about like an example of like when you drive through Bath, like where all those old ship captains' houses are. Like even without like having training in this, like when I go into the boat launch, I'm like, oh wow, this is an old neighborhood. Like everyone's house looks like the same way, and they have a lot of standards, and that's what I think of when I think of a historic district. Whereas growing up in Maine my whole life, I've seen dispersed historic buildings spread through communities without that district, and just be like, oh, there's the old Grange Hall, or oh, there's the, you know, the Johnson's old farmhouse, but it's not like, but the neighbor has like a manufactured home, and then the right next to it's a Dollar General, right? Like, and so that's like where I'm trying to wrap my mind around our historic district right now, and it just doesn't seem to align with that in my mind. So I don't know what the rest of the board's thoughts are, but
I'm just gonna be the devil's advocate for a second and say that when we approve the comp plan, if I remember correctly, we had other districts, but this district remained because I believe we voted, like how all the other ones that you were talking about, the floating district, and that it would be creating unauthorized districts because we hadn't voted those into existence. This one we did vote into existence. Am I correct in saying that?
I'm not sure.
Kristen, do you know?
you did certainly, you know, I mean, adopt the district as part of the ordinance. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I'm just saying, it in terms of aligning with the comp plan, the district existed and made it through the comp plan changes. So does that line of thinking still apply when?
Well, the comp plan doesn't make the ordinance changes. The comp plan makes suggestions. Because like when the comp plan talked about reevaluating resource protection. It didn't enact resource
No,
protection.
no,
in
I
the comp
understand
plan.
that, I understand that, I'm just saying that when we're talking about removing districts, we went through the comp plan process, this district existed, and it wasn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what
Like
you
the
mean.
other things changed about like how your minimum requirements for acreage, like everything went to rural residential, like those changes did take place, right? The whole town wasn't rural residential before, and after all of that happened, it was rural residential except for the historic district and then what was resource protected.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, the fact that the zoning stayed in place after the comp plan was redone doesn't necessarily mean that it complies with the comprehensive plan. It sort of just suggests that the policy interests at the time were to keep the district, and nobody was really looking to undo it at the time. So it's a big conversation,
Right.
right? And, you know, I wouldn't say, I'm looking through the comp plan right now. This is the 2000, oh, never mind, this is 2002.
The 2018 comp.
Yeah, the 2018 one.
Because
but
the 2002 comp plan said to make a district, and then the 2018 comp plan said to
Exactly.
get rid of districts.
And that's what I was going to point out, is if you look at the older comp plan, as compared, which sort of really supports the idea of the district, and then you look at the 2018 one, all of that sort of goes away. So there was what seems to me to be a pretty deliberate intention to move away from that. That said, you know, there's still references to protecting historic properties. So I wouldn't want to undo historic protections entirely. So that's where I sort of go back to, if we're not concerned about the district as a cohesive district, but we're really, like the comp plan says, concerned about protecting those specific properties, then we already have the structure to do that with some improvements to section 5.14, and we target those types of properties throughout town, which I think gets a little bit closer to what the comp plan is saying, if we want to protect historic properties throughout town, and not worry so much about the district, because the district is written as if it's comprehensive for that area, but in fact it's not. It just targets those specific properties within that district.
And the comp plan says to update the town ordinance to protect significant historic and archaeological resources in the community with recognition of need for reasonable and flexible treatment of property owners. And then it goes into talk about looking at properties broadly across the community, not just within one area. So we're gonna get into the details here, but like that's where I think that this is conforming to that desire to protect properties, but also not say, you know, when you don't have the district, there's no contributing like, I mean, right now we don't, like Kristen said, it's like even the properties that received protection within the district, the adjacent properties don't have to meet any conforming standards as part of that district. So it's not like the neighbor can't put, you know, a new metal roof on their property or whatever. So
I think that's that one particular part is the reason that I would be on board with moving towards eliminating the district. The reason why I would absolutely be against it is because I believe that area of town has significant historical value, not because of the buildings, but because of the area itself. If you go all the way back to our early maps, that area of town was the center of town. Everything, the general store, you know, the dance hall, like, I mean, it just, historically, the area itself has value, in my opinion. And so, for those reasons, I feel like the area should be protected, and I still feel that way. However, if that's not even what our ordinance is accomplishing right now, it seems like that's a moot point.
Yeah, I think you have, you know, you would have two choices about the district as a concept. You either lean in and make it a true historic district and try to preserve whatever you can of a general feel of the place, or you lean away from it and say, we've got a few properties here that are really important. We want to make sure that those are protected and preserved. But we're not going to worry about the district because there's really nothing to protect. That's a unifying sort of quality of that area.
and so it sounds like right now we're like, straddling this line of, we're not protecting the district, we're protecting the buildings, and there's only a handful of buildings, and that can be accomplished by just a broader policy that just focuses on.
Yeah,
Buildings.
exactly. And
Because
then,
like someone could put a pickleball court in across from one of the historic buildings right now, and it does not violate any historic district standards.
no, correct.
And they don't need to check with the historic district as long as it's not a historic building.
Right.
Is that
I'm not
true,
suggesting
though,
anyone's
even though
putting a
there's the
pickleball court in.
1,500-foot buffer that currently exists?
I mean, that was another issue. I'll just touch on that. The 1,500-foot, it's a radius, I believe.
Radius, yeah.
Around these historic properties creates their own sort of mini districts, which wasn't called for by the comprehensive plan, certainly not the 2018 one. So because those aren't zoning districts per se,
But
that
this
were
one
established
is.
properly, right? But those in and of themselves, that radius that it creates is a problem
Yeah.
legally. So I wanted to get rid of that too.
Can
But
you
the
explain the
1,500
legal problem?
Yeah,
there?
the legal problem is to establish districts, you have to have some reference to what you're trying to do in that district in the comprehensive plan, which we don't have here. But then the other thing is, you know, you have to go through a specific process to adopt new districts. Were people notified? I don't think they were. Nor do I think the intention was really to create these little mini districts, but that's, in effect, that's what it does. So there are a bunch of reasons why that concept doesn't work great. It's better to either, again, have a district and the standards apply throughout the district, or you maybe worry about what's on the property of a historic structure, which is more what we're moving toward with this amendment.
'Cause
But
the
the
radius
radius thing,
is
it
huge.
gets, it's huge.
It's at 3/4 of a mile diameter.
Exactly, and it's encompassing, you know, a lot of properties that don't have any visual line necessarily with the protected structures. So you just, once you set those onerous standards on those properties, it's like, well, what's the rational basis to do that here?
Right. I'm fully in agreement with that, 100%. My only thing about that is that the district, I feel like, is excluded from that conversation because the district exists, right? That district was established, does exist, was voted into existence. And so while I don't think that it should be a 1,500-foot buffer around that district, right? That one isn't one that's a de facto district. Like, that district does exist,
It does exist. And the question really is whether it should.
right?
Well, it was established before 2018, and then the 2018 comp plan said we want to move away from districts. And that's, so it's not like, and that's where I think what we're doing here fits that desire better, personally. But we haven't even let Kristen get through section A yet, and that's partially my fault, as usual, so.
Well, so I was just talking about the concept here. And the concept, in part two, is within the district, you had this sort of robust certificate of appropriateness procedure that applied to those properties only if they're in the district. But then there was this sort of hanging thread in 5.14 that sort of suggested there might be approval but doesn't explain how or by whom. And if you're going to read something into it about approval by the commission, you would have to sort of refer back to the Article 12 process. But really that process is more geared towards district, and it just, it doesn't really work in the way that it's structured today. But what I thought we would do, and the way the ordinance is structured in this draft, is if we're concerned about protecting these individual properties and preserving them, we would have a process that applies to those properties, whether they're in the former district or outside. And it's going to be, there's a permitting authority like there is for any project, whether it's the planning board or the code enforcement officer. When the project involves one of these listed types of a structure, in section A here, so if it's over 100 years old, if it's a cemetery or grave marker, if it's a church or a school that's more than 100 years old, or if it's on the historic register or eligible for listing on the historic register, that triggers this special review process where the code enforcement officer refers it to the historic commission to apply all of the standards that used to be in Article 12, and still are, but will be, sort of incorporated in this review process.
Kristen, just from my understanding is that the Department of Interior guidance is saying that just because we're listing it doesn't mean it needs to be protected. So this is going above and beyond and saying, we are suggesting that things that are listed or being considered for listing do get this review process.
Correct.
Which is above and beyond what DOI's standards are.
It is, and I'll say it's actually above and beyond what most towns even do, outside of a district.
Mm-hmm.
It's somewhat unusual to have a review process that applies to historic buildings throughout town. What you might see is standards that say, in a review, you're to consider whether a development has undue adverse impact on historic resources. So if you had that very old important structure across the street from something that was going to be big and ugly, does that have an undue impact on that original structure? But it does go a little beyond what most towns do to say we're gonna apply this special process and have this special board look at everything, if it's eligible for listing, if it's listed, or meets these other categories. So in that way, it's actually pretty robust process that this would put in. But it does change the referral that goes to the Historic Commission is going to be on an advisory basis. So you've got this board of qualified people who know what they're talking about when it comes to historic properties, looking at a project and determining whether it meets the standards. And then it's going to make a recommendation to the permitting authority, whether it's the planning board or the code enforcement officer. And in theory, that body or person can take it or leave it, that advice from the Historic Commission, but would be doing so at their peril because they've got, this body of people who know what they're talking about, who are making these recommendations. And if you're gonna not take those recommendations, you'd have to have a pretty darn good reason why. Yes.
So right now, something that's slightly analogous is like we have our Conservation Commission, and the planning board can choose to ask the Conservation Commission if they want to provide feedback on something, but it's not required for them to ask. It's not required for them to take that into consideration. Would this be different in this in the sense that the Historic District Commission would need to be asked on things that are happening on those buildings?
Correct.
So they have to be asked, not, oh, we could ask you.
No, it would be mandatory if it's one of these triggers. It's mandatory that they have to pass judgment on it.
Okay, that's an important clarification. I just wanted to make sure all our viewers here.
I have a question about, maybe you're gonna get there, but if they're not in agreement, what the process is at that point.
So the commission is gonna make its recommendation. Let's pretend it's a building permit that the CEO is issuing. So the CEO is gonna say, oh, this building is over 100 years old. I'm gonna look it up and see if it's eligible for listing or if it's listed. So let's say it's eligible for listing. So the CEO then has to make the referral to the Historic Commission, which will hold a meeting and review the standards and then make a recommendation back to the CEO. The recommendation is probably not going to be just like straight deny. The recommendation is probably going to be, something like, we don't like the siding materials. It's not in keeping with the age of the home, and we want to see, this type of shingle. And the CEO would take that, and I would suspect in most cases would say, that's reasonable. I understand why that would be recommended, and I'm going to approve this with the condition that the siding has to be this. If the CEO, for whatever reason, believes that the commission didn't appropriately apply the standards, went too far, did something incorrect, the CEO could say, I understand that was their recommendation. I don't think it's required by the ordinance standards, so I am going to approve it without that condition about the siding. Now, let's say a neighbor does not like the fact that that building permit was issued. the neighbor could say, CEO, you did wrong in issuing this permit because the commission looked at this, and based on historic standards, I feel that, you know, the commission was right, and you, CEO, were wrong to not take their recommendation. So I'm gonna appeal on that basis. And it would go to Board of Appeals, might go to court, whatever it's going to do. But that's how that dispute there would get resolved. There's no process baked into what we've written here about what happens if there's a disagreement. If we think that that's, you know, reasonably likely, we can certainly build some process in. And I
So-
would think that would be sort of referral to the automatic referral to the Board of Appeals before permit is issued or not issued.
My question though is, there are a lot of activities people can partake in when their homes that are not permitted. You know, I don't believe you need a permit to change the siding on your home. Does this mean that if you are a owner of one of these buildings, you now do need a permit to change the siding, or is this only applicable for permitted activities, extensions, garages and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's only gonna be where there's some requirement in the ordinance already that you gotta get a permit
Mm-hmm.
for what you're doing.
Yep, because we've run into before with questions about like, if someone's changing out their window, does it need to be reviewed? And it's, you know, that was part of what helped bring this to fruition, so.
I think though our website, under the permit section on that page says, you know, these are the permits required and not required, but you need to check in with the historic information, leading you to believe that
There
the
is,
rules
yeah.
could be different.
That's, yeah, unclear, yeah.
So, is this document available on the website?
It's in our
It's in
agenda
our
packet.
So it's available on the website, right? So, can we either let Kristen read this whole thing to us, which I don't think is necessary, or let her explain and then ask questions, because I think 90% of these questions are here. And I
Yeah,
personally can't stay all night. And I feel like at the rate we're going, we're gonna be here all night just on this one topic. And I think,
so I think we have the responsibility to do due diligence when we're making an ordinance change, and just saying, read the website has not been a useful strategy for us in the past. So the questions I'm asking are questions that I anticipate being asked by the community, so we can have a record of those questions being asked and answered, so people have the option to either read or go watch the video to see the questions. That's why I'm asking questions. I've read it, I understand it, but I'm asking questions for the edification of the community, so.
And for what it's worth, I think we've already touched on the process
Mhm.
and what that looks like. Really, the only thing that we haven't talked about is the standards themselves that the commission is going to be applying in its advisory review. And by the way, the permitting authority is applying these same standards too. So they are taken 100% from the existing Article 12. So these are, you know, what the commission is used to applying to these projects when it goes before them. And they look at things like, you know, is there visual compatibility? Are buildings similar height, similar roof shape? The easiest way to exemplify this is, you know, the historic cape that's getting a barn addition on it. Are we going to put a 3-story metal garage attachment on it? No, we're not going to do that because it's not in keeping with what's already there. It detracts from the historic value of it. But it's, you know, there is a fair amount of subjectivity and relativity baked into these standards. And it is broad enough in the right circumstances to allow a cool modern barn attachment to an existing historic structure, as long as the sort of architectural cues are still there. So does it have a similar type of peaked roof? Does it have references in terms of the types
Modern farmhouses are all
Yeah,
the rage right now.
exactly.
So.
And you see in historic, even in the tightest historic districts, you see these projects get green-lighted because, you know, things progress and new building processes and materials are adopted, but the idea is we kind of keep that sort of visual harmony, and we don't, you know, do anything that really makes the original building lesser in its value. So anyway, that, you know, that's what the commission's gonna be looking at. We're not reinventing the wheel when it comes to these standards. And there are special processes for if a building is going to be demolished or relocated. And it is delayed For a little while, the building is posted so that people driving by are aware that it's slated for possible removal or moving, so that people have an opportunity to comment on it before the Historic Commission does. So that's the only distinction between those types of projects and the run-of-the-mill building permit type of a project. And again, though, in all of those cases, including moving or removing a structure, your CEO or the planning board is going to be the one who ultimately gives the thumbs up or thumbs down on that project based on what the commission has said. So that is that. And I will say, you know, I don't think it has happened here much, but historic district processes are notorious for being really fraught and prolonged and really expensive for people. And there is this perception in some of these communities where they have these really tight districts that the Historic Commission runs amok and there's no one else like looking over their work. So this provides a sort of check and balance. It gives them, with their credible backgrounds and experience, a really strong role in this, but it also gives someone, you know, some degree of a check and balance to say, I get it, but I don't think it meets the standard for whatever reason, or I do.
This also would change the name of our, or the board from Historic District Commission to Historic Commission, because there's no longer.
There's no district.
Which was one of the goals highlighted for this year as well. Real quick before you ask your question, Heather, my only question here is under section 12.1 C4, where it says process. It says where review by the Historic Commission is required, then code enforcement officer shall forward the application. And should that say the code enforcement officer or planning board? Because if it's a situation where the planning board is doing the review, do we need to call that out separately, or do we need to say like the issuing body? Or I'm not a lawyer. I'm just asking.
No, I did that deliberately because I want this to go to the Historic Commission as early in the process as possible, because you don't want it to go to the planning board and have a whole meeting, completeness meeting, before it even starts that referral process.
Perfect. I
So,
understand that. Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
code
the
enforcement
CEO
officer is the first person who gets it. So they're saying immediately then go to
Exactly. And the planning board process can proceed too. You know, you could do them on dual tracks. But the CEO is used to taking in an application and making a determination of, okay, you know, where does this fall on the chart? Does it go to the planning board? Do I issue the permit? So as part of that same process, he's going to be determining, does it need to go to the commission, as well as the planning board.
I'm gonna let Heather go first. She had her hand up.
I have two things. I do think it's important, if there's a disagreement, to have the process outlined as part of it, because we have been in that situation multiple times, and I just do think it's important for everybody's sake for that to be outlined. The other thing is that I'm all about buffering in terms of maintaining our rural character, and also to, in this particular situation, especially if we're going to not have the district. I always call out the example on the way to Auburn, that church, and then those multi-units that are built right there. And I'm not seeing, so please call it out if I'm missing it, where there's any type of buffering standard as part of this.
Well, so when you talk about buffering, that's going to be buffering on a property that is not on the same lot as a historic building. So then you go to the general approval standards under the ordinance, and I cannot call out exactly where it would be right now, but I can guarantee there's something in there that says, as a permitting standard, that it's not going to have an undue impact on a historic resource, which would be anything that falls under this section. And I will take a look real quick and read you what it says.
That's a good question. Deb, you had a question too?
Yeah, one thing that I think was missing here, or maybe I missed it, but the act of communicating to people that they own a home that is historic, or if someone buys a home. I mean, we had that situation that we talked about a few meetings ago where someone replaced windows and they didn't know they, you know. I think that's kind of rampant maybe across the board in all permitting and stuff, but there's, you know, is there anyone responsible to ensure that the people that fall under this, the homeowners that fall under this, understand it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because like, for example, when we made changes to when the town voted to make a change to the resource protection, anyone who was subject to a change received notification. And my question here is like, are we gonna send notification to anyone who has a known stone wall over 100 years, or a school or a church over 100 years, or any of these registered places? Because there's only a handful of registered places. It's like, what, do you remember the number off the top of your head? It's less than 20. It might even be less than 10.
And when you
It's
say
less than 10.
you
Yeah,
say
less-
registered
That
at
meet
the
like
federal level?
Maine Historic Preservation Commission or Natural Register of Historic Places. It's like less than 10. It's like I think the Quaker Meeting House.
I think there's
And the
5
Bliss-
on the
the Bliss
registry, and
Inn,
then there's like 3 more that are eligible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just don't want this to seem like we're proposing, to your point, like, hey, here's this new ordinance on property that you own that you were not aware of. You know what I mean?
Right, I just didn't see that fall as a responsibility for the
Isn't that the point
commission.
of the survey we were
Yeah, I was
talking
gonna
about
say the same
before?
thing, yeah,
And they get
that-
noticed through that?
Right, they will get noticed at the end of the survey saying,
Well, this is
gone through a
separate. This
survey."
is separate from the survey.
But
yeah.
you're talking about notice of these buildings, and they would likely, that information would fall under the survey, which they would then have access to.
In the meantime, you take them one at a time, whether you do the survey or not. If somebody comes up with a permit, then,
Yeah, well, we have the known
research.
buildings now. Yeah, and
well,
so
the known buildings, you know,
But you,
the handful.
that's a good point, you could incorporate the communication of that.
That's
through
when
the-
you would do it. And up until that time, you do the survey, you don't really know, right? I mean, you could have the CEO do a bunch of research ahead of time when he gets a permit on, you know, look at the record and say, this is 100 years old or not, you know, period. I mean, it's either on the tax books for 100 years or it hasn't been. I don't know. I don't think it's a hard thing if it's noted in there and there, you know. on
yeah, the
top.
only reason I'm bringing it up is because if someone's saying, "Hey, you're going to create this rule," and then all of a sudden we do a survey, I find out my house qualifies under the criteria laid out in Historic Resources Section A here. Now I have this new,
I
let's
think
say,
that already
burden.
exists.
Yeah, and so I'm
That-
just trying
yeah.
to clarify here.
Yeah.
A lot of fires at 99 years.
Yeah. So, if it's not a concern, I just wanted to flag it. But it seems here we're just limited really to the Historic Preservation Commission, Maine Historic Preservation Commission listing, National Register of Historic Places, 100-year-old churches or schools, cemeteries, and then stone walls or granite markers. And then the standard's only being applied if the activity is a already permitted activity that requires a permit to change it, you know.
So that one thing right there, like given the window, right? Like the 9/9 or the 12/12 or whatever it is when it comes to the windows, like that, if you don't need a permit to change your windows in your home, but if you're making an alteration to windows in one of these buildings, I mean, that changes that. So that part of it, that part I'm having a little bit of a hard time wrapping my brain around. Not to make things more convoluted, but, I mean, we literally just had that example happen.
Yeah, and I just,
You go to the code enforcement page, it leads you to believe you have to get a permit, or you have to get it approved.
Well, if they're
Even
But there's not
even
the-
if there's no permit required.
yeah, but I don't think that authority is then handed out in the ordinance, though. That's the challenge.
Right.
And that's where this whole misunderstanding between the boards and commissions started was, I thought you were supposed to come to me for this. It's like, well, no, technically not, you know. I think this is saying, yes, you do for permanent activities, you have to go through CEO now and Historic Commission. Non-permanent activities, you don't have control over.
I think that once this passes, if this passes, then, correct me if I'm wrong, but notice is presumed, and people are gonna have to take it upon themselves until the survey comes out, that if they think they might be in one of these categories, they have to check. And, you know, at some point, we have to figure out when we can't just hand feed people the information, and they have to do some work on their own. And I think it comes to, this is passing, there's notice of this in our meetings, there'll be notice of this for the town meeting. There will be other meetings where this is discussed. And if there's a concern, they think they can do their own research, they can ask a code enforcement officer. And if it passes, you know, they have to do it. And if not, you know, at some point, we just have to say, too bad.
Can I ask a process question?
Sure.
Is the goal tonight to like vote on this as it stands right now?
We need to hand this off to the planning board ASAP, because they need to have, they need to get up to speed on it, and then it needs to be ready for a public hearing in advance of the town meeting.
Is it a situation where we can vote with proposed edits if everyone agrees to add if there's they're not in agreement with the process that I'm talking about, if they're not in agreement, have that laid out, and then, I do have concerns around the buffering thing.
Ken?
Yeah, and actually, to the point of whether people need to be notified or not, I just wanted to point out that that list of structures that are required to have special review is already in the ordinance. It's just there wasn't a good process to deal with it. So that's not changing anything in terms of, you know, it was covered by some special review. But I do think, you know, if you want to make sure that you can't, for instance, change it out windows in a historic structure without going through this process, I don't think that language is in here today. The Article 12 standards that are in there today say that a certificate of appropriateness is required for any change in exterior appearance of any building or structure. And it doesn't, you know, the draft that we have in front of us today does not say that. It says where you need a permit, which would be more of a true structural alteration.
Which is my preference personally. Like, I think the idea of creating an onerous process for swapping your doors and windows is problematic. I would be more concerned about that if we had a true historic district where there is all this like contributing activity around that looks like a historic part of town. But when you have dispersed individual buildings like that are old, that to me, making someone go through the process and now telling them like, you can't replace your siding with vinyl, you have to go cedar clapboard because you're the one building that's,
No, but we're talking about the buildings that meet this criteria and applying the standards to the buildings that meet this criteria.
yeah, and I'm saying I don't necessarily agree that any change to any building, those buildings should have to go through a permitting process. If you want to change your window because someone threw a rock through it, you now have to go through this process of getting a certificate
For
of
those
approval.
8 properties, I do,
Yeah, and that's just a disagreement.
yeah.
So.
For those 8 properties, I definitely feel that way, that they should, I do.
And that's where my question is,
That
if
would
we're
be
putting,
over and above the current permitting.
right, and that's my
Because you
question
don't need
is,
a permit for a new roof.
right, and so my question there is if the desire is to say any structural change to that building or any change to that building is now requires a permit, I think that puts us in a category of like needing to provide notifications and stuff like that because
I don't think it
property-
needs to have a permit. What was the thing that you just said right before that, Kristen? Any change to the exterior?
Appearance of any building or structure today it's in an historic district.
Today it's the district, not the, it's the
Right.
older, it's the listed buildings in the district, not all listed buildings in the community.
Right.
So it would be a significant change.
If, not this, but if we added,
If you added that permitting requirement to all historic buildings throughout.
because the permitting requirement is, the letter of,
Certificate of
certificate of
appropriateness.
appropriateness is triggered by a permit. And so if it's not permanent activity, they don't need it. So now if we're saying, if you're one of these buildings, any change to the exterior of your building becomes a permanent activity, I think that's overstepping the bounds of this, and now we're getting into, we need to send out notifications and have public hearings, because you're now changing what someone can legally do with their own home or their own property, much like what we did with the, environmental
Does
standards.
that apply to the ones that are on the register or eligible?
If you have a property that is on the register, my understanding is there are restrictions on what you can do with the property in there.
Right.
You don't need a planning board or a code enforcement officer or a commission to tell you what you can and
Right,
can't do.
I thought A4 covers what you're talking about. I
Okay.
I don't know why.
If it does, then I'm fine with
I
that,
mean, anything that's already on the list
or eligible for the
or
list.
eligible for the list is already gonna
Have to go,
If it's
Yeah,
deemed
you
eligible.
can't change the windows. You can't change, I mean, that's the whole idea of it.
Kristen,
right?
do you
I
agree
don't-
with that?
No, that's not
No,
true.
no.
That's
It's
not
only-
true.
It's only if the project itself needs a permit from the.
Right. And the Department of
Yeah.
Interior is
So
very
you can-
clear that a listing of a building does not create a regulation of it. It's just saying, we acknowledge that this is a historic building. This does not mean there has to be a regulation. So right now, if you
So they
have,
could- So they could
if-
board up the window and they could paint it over to make it look like a window and call it a day.
they can do whatever they want
If it
because
looks
it's not
authentic.
it's not a permanent activity. So if you own a Maine Historic Preservation Commission listed house or a National Register of Historic Places house, and the town does not have an ordinance requiring you to get a permit to change doors, windows, sidings, gutters, roofs, you don't need to meet any additional standard. You could take that house and put pink vinyl siding and a purple metal roof on it and LED lights all over the front of it. It's not, there's
See,
no
now,
regulation.
to me, that does not align with protecting our historical resources.
Well, what constitutes letter? That's where you get the letter of appropriateness for things that require those changes. But but that's a whole nother thing. If we're now saying you can't change any of the facade of your building without having a permit, that broadly expands what we're looking at right here. So, I'm fine with this, going to the planning board the way it is now. I'm comfortable with that, personally. This is for any expansion of buildings or anything that's listed as a permanent activity within our requirements, so. Kristen, do you have anything else to add on the discussion?
No, I'm here to do whatever on a policy, basis the board wants to do with this.
Yeah, so at this.
If you have concerns or things you want incorporated or
Yeah.
changed, I could certainly take them to the planning board.
So at this point, I think what we need to do is we either need to vote to hand this off to the planning board as is, vote to make a change, or vote to table it for a later date if there's no.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
couple more things?
Yeah.
Or point out? In, 2H and I are both titled roof shapes. They're the same, so I think one of them can come out. And then, in the, is it 12.1A2, I think it should say that the first 5 members have staggering terms. And also, I would note that the current commission, there's, I can't remember if it's requirement or suggestions, that they have some type of specialized training. And, I don't think we've been able to find people with that specialized training. But you put me on that commission, and I'm not gonna tell you what siding matches and what color and all that stuff. So I think if we're not going to be looking for those people, we should require some type of training in this. And I think it should be required here so that people have to do it and there's no question about it.
Well, 12.1A2 does say appointment based on demonstrated interest, ability, experience, and desire to promote historic preservation in town. So it does lay out a few criteria.
What does that mean? Ability?
Well,
I have the ability to do it at some point with training.
Right, and that's
I
why-
have do I have the experience? I haven't been on a commission to do that, but I don't know who has. And a desire? I think so.
I have
I
a
have that.
suggestion
I was just
around
gonna
this,
say,
based
that's,
on
one
what the
second,
commission
that's
came
where
and
the
said.
appointed, the elected officials are doing the appointment, and that's where it's a policy decision. And if people want to express that as part of their policy platform when they run for office, that like, I want to make sure we only have certified, inspectors or whatever, that's part of it, but like that, I think that outlining specific criteria right now would be challenging personally.
So I have a suggestion to go along with what Josh said, where when Dave was here and he was talking about getting the certification through that organization, which I'm not recalling what the acronym was now, right? That requires that the people that are part of the commission have training and meet these criteria for certification. So if we added to this, that the commission be certified by whatever that entity is, that takes care of those people. They have to maintain that to be able to continue to be certified by that organization. So if we added to this that the commission needs to be part of whatever that entity is, that would take care of what Josh's concern is. And they desire to do that. It also opens up grant opportunities for them. Well, after today, who knows, but,
I think that,
Could be extra expense to the town. then,
yeah, I
if
think
we
there
have
could
to
be a fiscal
certify.
note there. And I think that keeping it as broad as, personally, I think keeping it with the broad thing here now provides flexibility for this board or future iterations of the board to set those standards. And especially when it's all volunteer capacity, there are gonna be times where you have volunteers who have a variety of different capacities, and if the board in the future says, we wanna pursue this training, I think it's important, but I think that calling it out would be difficult now, at this point in the process, personally.
It's difficult how.
What's the name of the organization, what's the training and certification, what's the criteria, those are the things.
How
that I
about
thought
this?
was-
How about this? Any member appointed to this, this commission shall within 3 months have undertaken training to gain knowledge of this, or sign up for training to do this if that training has not been made available to them in that 3 months.
But that just moves the previous question of, what does undertaking training mean? Does undertaking training mean I self-educated by reading the historic district handbook? Or, like, if we're not calling out a specific criteria,
In that case, I move to table this discussion until we can get that information.
So as
Is
you were
that-
talking, I wrote a line, my line was, the select board may require training in historic preservation as a condition of any appointment. So if you get somebody who is excited about the prospect but doesn't really have a lot of
Mhm.
background, you could say, for that person, you know, we love your enthusiasm, but we want you as a condition of your appointment to do X training in Y period of time. So it gives you the flexibility to add it. Frankly, I think you would have had it anyway, but calling it out here,
Mhm.
that kind of bridge the gap.
that does for me. I think that this is important to have this discussion though, because it's a different commission, because it does have some requirement to provide input as opposed to our other commissions that don't, so we don't have to do the same thing for those commissions, but I think that that's broad enough language to cover my concerns.
well, I literally said to you that I felt like that situation should be required for all
For all, well,
committees, boards, commissions, all of
That's a
that.
different
I know it
conversation.
is. I'm just saying, Josh's line of thinking with this, I think should apply to everything, but we can have that conversation at a
I think
later
we
date.
will struggle to get volunteers for all the boards and stuff like that if we were to enact something like that, so.
On the question of staggering, I'm hoping that they are already staggered, because when they're appointed, we can check on that. But if they were
Yeah.
already staggered, the idea is those people roll over into the new historic commission seats, so that staggering will be baked in.
Mhm. Jessica, you were nodding that they are
Already
staggered? Perfect.
Great.
Did you have others, Josh? Other things?
No?
Besides those things that you called out?
No, I think the biggest issue is what you were asking, and frankly, I mean, I don't know.
Which
I'm not
thing
an-
that I was asking?
About the windows and the siding.
So that wouldn't be under visual compatibility, no?
If it doesn't currently require a permit, it wouldn't be subject to anything in 5.14, section 12.
Whether people want that or not, again, I'm no expert. I look at the building, it is what it is. I'm not gonna judge it based on the siding or what the windows look like. So, I'm not an expert, so I won't speak on that, but I understand why you're raising that, and, I would be interested in getting other people's opinion on that, but we don't have the
So,
time,
so
so.
this is gonna go to the planning board and they're going to
Yeah.
review this as well, or they're just
Yeah,
gonna go
it needs to go
forward
to the
with it?
planning board because they're doing their public meeting for all warrant language.
Right, but are they gonna review this first? to
Yeah,
see-
we'll get their input and they'll get input from the community, and then we'll
and
have
then
to
it-
draft
then
warrant
it-
language.
Then it comes back to us and we
Yeah.
could make changes.
This is the same process as that, so we're just taking on this step for them now because of their workload.
Mhm.
And it's just
So
they've
could
been really busy.
I will vote if we can, you can make a note of my concerns. The concern about what happens if they disagree, the concern around buffering, and the concern about the window, you have a clear sense of what it was that I was bringing up, right?
Yeah,
The
I do.
issues, okay, thank
It's a
you.
question of applicability.
Mhm.
Do we want it to only be when it's a permit required event?
Mhm.
Or do we want to broaden it to be any exterior changes like Article 12 does? Then beyond that, there's this question of, just scanning through, I think the ordinance might already have a little deficiency in there about protection of historic resources. Because it really just talks about on the property as opposed to off the property unless it's a subdivision application.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So my
There's no
issue
way.
around that is that I think currently what it says is that it has to provide a vegetative buffer, but like one of the members of the commission was saying, a low growing blueberry bush counts as, that doesn't accomplish like the visual buffering to alleviate the situation like on Route 136.
Again, that's not a concern of mine because we don't have a historic district that has contributing factors outside of the
Right,
house
but do
being
you want
burned
an
down.
Irving gas station to go in across the street from a Union church?
It's
Because I don't.
not a concern of mine, no.
Well, I think it is a concern of
But
some people, so I would just like
so
for it to
can
be
I
discussed.
interrupt for a second? I'm sorry, but I don't think it's helpful for you to say it's not a concern of mine when she's raising a concern, because it's obviously a concern to Heather. So I just like to let her finish and raise it without feeling, I feel like she's being attacked. I don't know if that's your intent, I don't think it is,
No.
but I just think she needs to be able to say what she's thinking and
Yeah, I'm saying I understand your concern, I don't share it, and we have to vocalize our differences.
I think if we're eliminating the 1,500-foot buffer, right, or for all areas, but whatever, I just think if all of that, those protections are going to go away with this, it's important for us to consider buffering and screening requirements. And I beat that drum about everything, not just about historic resources. And I just don't want that to be overlooked, because once we get rid of it, we can't undo it, right? And so an Irving could go in across the street from the Bliss Farm or from the Methodist Church, and maybe that's fine with everybody, but once that's gone, it's gone, and we can't get it back.
So it doesn't exist in our ordinance now. Right now, there's nothing that prevents someone from doing that on a property that's across the road from that.
In the historic district, it does.
Only in the historic district,
Right.
but like the Bliss Farm, the, almost, only like one of the buildings listed on the historic preservation is in the historic district, nothing else is in there.
I disagree, because there was all of that discrepancy when those subdivisions went in.
Well, subdivision is separate. I
Okay.
think, right, Kristen?
Sorry.
The subdivision is a separate consideration for that 1,500 feet,
Yeah.
but nothing else is.
Right, the subdivision has better standards about impact on
Yeah.
historic things. It's when you get to a development that's like, it's a single building permit or it's a site plan review kind of thing.
So
that
just
I think we could strengthen that.
for our understanding, because I want to make sure we're like, and this isn't attacking your position, it's
Yeah.
trying to understand. Right now, within that 1,500-foot buffer, if someone wants to put a building across the street, there's no special requirement that they're allowed, that they have to meet?
There clearly was the intent that there be.
But there isn't any.
But there isn't.
Okay. Unless it's a subdivision, then,
Unless it's a subdivision, but it's not because of the radius, that's the issue, it's just the,
subdivision
Impact.
standards, okay.
yeah. Within those standards.
So, Kristen's noted your things, and so are we comfortable sending this with those notes to the planning board to get additional feedback and information from the community?
That's
I
the
think community
process.
input would be-
Yeah, so that's what happens. They go and people are gonna be able to give feedback to the planning board.
Planning board's gonna hold a public hearing on this and all the other land use ordinance changes.
Mhm.
the planning board will give its own feedback as part of that, but also hear from the public and hopefully incorporate anything that's sort of a common theme.
Mm-hmm. And then it comes back to us with that feedback. We have to craft the warrant language, but then the warrant language goes to another hearing prior to the town meeting.
Yeah, it may. This is always a difficult thing about whether you're supposed to go back to a second public hearing to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
Usually boards want to do it if time permits, just so people have, you know, a fresh look at whatever has been a change. But as long as there's been a hearing and the changes came out of that hearing, I am okay with bypassing the second public hearing. It's just gonna be up to the board, the timing, all of that.
So if this
And how
goes,
big and sweeping the changes are.
so if this goes to the planning board, they hold their public hearing, they come back and say, this is our feedback, then we craft language based off of this and that feedback. It doesn't need to go to another.
It may or may not. I'm gonna hedge on that because it kind of depends for me on, was it within the scope of the stuff that we already had in
Well,
here, and we're
the-
tweaking it, or are we going crazy and changing it?
The reason I ask is because if the feedback is require permitting for all exterior changes, that becomes a significant change to property rights. And
Right.
I think that becomes an entirely different ordinance than what you have presented in front of
I was
us
just
today.
gonna use that as my example. If this comes back with a recommendation that we have it broadened to be any project,
Mhm.
whether it needs a permit or not, I would want to go back to the second public hearing. If it's, we like the district, we want the district reinserted, that would, you know.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because it becomes a time concern here, because it's January 28th, so it's February. The public hearing for the warrant language would have to be no later than 4 weeks, no sooner than 2 weeks. So we're with our April 1st town meeting, we're in that window in 2 weeks. And so we would need to have a public hearing, and then the notice requirements for a second public hearing to be done 2 weeks prior to, and I'm just concerned about the time if there's
Yeah,
the.
and that's where I feel there's wiggle room sometimes, depending on how it all shakes out time-wise.
Mhm.
I might say it's completely fine to not do the 2 weeks of published notice for the public hearing. We can take it down to 1 week, because it's not the official public hearing at that point, it's sort of a follow.
Even if there was a substantive change to the
Yeah.
scope and scale? Okay. I'm
Others
just-
are more
yeah.
conservative about this, and that is my advice in the way I read the statute. The statute says the public shall be heard in the development of a zoning ordinance.
Mhm.
I think when you have that hearing, you've met that standard.
Okay, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just making
Yeah.
sure I understand,
No,
yeah.
but just in case somebody were to call me municipal association, give a more conservative,
Mhm.
angle there, that's mine.
Okay, so do I have a motion to send?
Can I ask one more? In 5.14A4, should there be a comma after the second on in that sentence before the National Register of Historic Places?
Yeah, deemed eligible, any structure or site listed on the deemed eligible, it should be for listing by, comma. That actually would read the.
Because I just raised that because I think there had been talk about listing by the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, but there's no listing. If it's deemed eligible for listing by them on the National Historic Register.
So do I have a motion to send this to the planning board with the attached notes and the Scribner edits?
So moved.
Do we have any additional discussion? I think it's good feedback, so really appreciate the work
You know,
on
when
this.
this is going to planning board,
I wanna send it to
Their
them
next
tomorrow.
meeting
Their
is
next meeting
the
is
5th.
February 5th, so.
and what I'm gonna do right now then is send this to George and he'll
Mhm.
get that to the planning board. I assume I will do my best to attend that meeting so I can convey all this.
Yeah, I can pull it up here right now, so.
And have George watch this speak.
George always watches,
He does.
yeah. Yeah,
I
George
can-
said,
George on vacation for that meeting, or is the meeting, he leaves that the day after?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, they're meeting February 5th to go over, I think he emailed you that, Kristen, as well.
Did we vote?
No, we're still in discussion. Yep. The planning board will be taking public input on contract zoning and historic preservation at the upcoming meeting on February 5th. So, any additional discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion? Any opposition? Seeing none, the motion passes. I don't think we need Kristen for the architectural survey, unless folks want to ask her questions about it. All right,
So, I mean, based on the prior discussion we just had with the questions about notice, it's important to get it done. Part of my concern is that my recollection from our meeting when this issue was raised the first time was we were asking for more information, we were asking for it by a certain time, and they missed that time. So that's a little frustrating to me.
well, and my concern too is that the quote is based off of one conversation.
It's-
And a round number based off of one conversation. That's hard to approach the community on personally, especially when there's the opportunity to gather this information. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gather this information 8 months later as part of something we're already paying for. And so I'm not necessarily opposed to just putting it as its own separate question at the town meeting and letting the voters decide if they want to incur that, but I just have a really hard time from a fiscal responsibility standpoint budgeting to do this twice. I know one of their concerns was that they wouldn't be able to ask for money again until July of or June of 2026 or 2026 because of the budget being an 18-month. And I don't share in that concern because if in 2027 the process is starting anyways, I think that we can wait that long personally. So happy to hear what other folks think.
I agree with what you said.
Mhm.
I think putting $10,000 in the budget for this right now, based on that conversation.
Yeah, and I
It's a
think
stretch.
I think it's a really noble effort putting forward and that sort of stuff, but just we have a lot of elements right now, and you know our direction to Jerry a few meetings ago was very much limit anything new as part of the budget cycle, and so I'd be more inclined to delay on this until 2027.
So I think if Jerry came to us with this idea, we would tell him no, get more information, get us a solid quote, something in writing. I mean, saying this after my daughter just brought the packet back from her historic tour with Tia that she did, that I've already read twice. It's amazing work, and the importance of this, I mean, I think is obvious, but if Jerry came to us with this, I would say no, and so I agree. I just don't think
It's not fleshed out a
it's
lot.
it's not something I would be comfortable saying. Hey, let's give $10,000. Well, is that enough? I don't know. I'm hoping so. Yeah, and so that's my concern. And
Joe, did you have something to add?
No, I'm fine with letting this part of it go. Is there anything else that they would need money for in regards to if the ordinance passed?
They
If they
haven't
have to do-
requested anything.
I realize that, but are they not seeing past the haze, so to speak, that, you know, if we were to go this route and they would have to, let's say, hire an expert to come in and look at one of the structures that they're modifying, would they need money for that? I'm just looking
Yeah.
at, like you say, 18 months is a long time. Should we set aside, I mean, just in general, I know it's off topic a little bit, but they are asking for money for this, but should they have really asked for money for, you know, bringing in an expert if they have to do
So-
some sort of mediation over a property, or is that coming under the planning board's purview at that point if it gets to that far?
I think
Or
if
the-
it got to something that intense, that would be more under like an application's like escrow account.
Okay,
Because the way that the ordinance that Kristen just shared with us that we voted to send to the planning board states, like, it's their job to provide the input based off of their experience. If they're in a position where it's to a scale that they can't, that to me that likely seems like it's in in a large-scale development that's already going through maybe a site review or something like that, that would have an escrow component.
I also think if that were to pass and their recommendation was, we need an expert,
Yeah,
right?
then
Then
that'd
they
be
can
different.
put that on the applicant to say that it's
Yeah.
their
No, that's
responsibility to
fine.
pay
I
for it.
just
I think
thinking
it's a
ahead,
really
yeah.
good point. It is a long time
It
and
is, I mean, so I get that part of it, and, you know, things come up.
I think it's a
Maybe-
good question, you know.
But anyways, but I'm fine with, not
Creating
approving
any
this.
new legislation always creates unexpected discoveries
I would-
down the
I
road,
would say
you know.
wait, pay for it once in 2027 and wait
Mm-hmm.
if we know what our properties are already that we have to worry about downtown here.
Yeah.
So I would just like to add one comment about this. I think the $10,000, I think it would actually, and if we wait and do it in 2027, that figure included the professional training, all of the volunteers. And so that part of it would not come under this expense because the reval company would be the ones that are doing the field work,
Collecting the data.
right? They're collecting the data, which is what she would have had to have trained
Someone to do.
the
yeah.
25 volunteers to do it. So I
Redundant.
do think that this is actually gonna end up being less expensive.
Well, that's why I don't wanna pay for it
Because-
twice, and I don't wanna
right.
pay for it when it becomes,
Because at that point,
Yeah.
it's the professional compiling all of that data, doing the written report, and then entering it into the Karma system.
yeah, cause that
So-
10,000, it was a lot of it was just, like you said, teaching people how to get that and bring them the information to write the report, and now it's like, here's all the information.
Right.
You're just writing the report at this point, so. I would take a motion to, reject this request for $10,000.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Sure. Any additional discussion? Yeah, I don't have any other points to make. I think we just covered them. Do I have a motion, all in favor of the motion? Any opposition? Seeing none? And, I can write an email to the Durham Historic District Commission to inform them of that, even though I'm, imagine someone, at least one of them's watching the meeting tonight, so.
I think it's important to officially communicate from us.
100%, yeah. Okay. Alrighty, we're now back to the budget review and amendments. So, last week we got through a good chunk of these and asking questions about the changes. And we got, I believe, to, Jerry, you remember what point we dropped off at?
I think we got through most.
It was everything but the reserves.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so just a reminder for folks watching at home, this is an 18-month budget. So some expenses are incurred twice in that 18 months. Some expenses are incurred once. Some expenses are, the same monthly. And so we've gone through the process of annualizing those changes here in the budget sheet. And so by annualized, I mean that is the 1 year cost, which includes whether the amount went up because of the cost of doing business, diesel expenses increasing or whatever, or the amount is representative of 2 payments of that service versus 1 payment of that service. So that's what we mean by annualized. And when we meet with the budget committee next week, we'll go over that line by line if they have those questions and make sure we make that super clear as to what that number represents in the 18-month timeline. So, Joe, I know you watched from home. Did you have any questions on anything we discussed last time around?
No, like I said, I think I sent it in an email to the board that I thought this was excellent work by Jerry and his
Staff, yeah.
Fabulous budget and exactly what we asked for.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really good blend of using fund balance. And yeah.
Well, and
I have
one-
no questions really. No.
And one thing I want to point about using the fund balance is if we look at the fund balance amount, it is very close to the reserve account amount in terms of what we're populating the reserve account with. So the vast majority of the fund balance is just allocating funds for future capital, which saves us money because it removes the need to finance or borrow in the future, and it also creates a level funding of those capital accounts, which is a thing that Jerry was tasked with last year. And so that's where we're seeing most of those fund balance, most of that fund balance be amount being kind of allocated for it. I mean, it doesn't get allocated for that, but
No,
when
I
you
get
look
it.
at the amount that we're funding in the fund balance, it lays out with that pretty well. So let's hop here onto the reserves and community budget information. Jerry, did you have anything you wanted to add on this before we started chatting about it?
No, I have nothing really to add. You have your supplemental budget, right?
Yep. And-
So you'll see that on page 18 of your budget, from 99.85 is at 598,500, which is what I've got in here for your reserve account. So I didn't really plug in anything for these other reserve accounts, like the gazebo has been something that has been brought up. I didn't put any money out, leave that up to you folks to.
I mean, in worst case scenario, that falls under the town building, right?
Right.
Well,
absolutely.
yeah.
Then, hold on. And then like down below that, when you see the community services donation, I only put 1,000 in for general assistance. Durham Youth Baseball has asked for 2,500, but you've got a recreation account you can pull that from. The Snowmobile Club has asked for their 1,100, you can pull that from the recreation account, so that's why I didn't add anything in taxes. The only thing that you really have left is if you want to donate to the Freeport Scholarship like you did last year. I have not heard from them this year, they haven't asked. So really, you all have to figure out what you wanna do here, add to it, take from it,
Yeah.
whatever you want.
So, to Jerry's point there, I think that in the past we've called out these individual community services and donations, but when we already have a recreation account, we can pull requests out of that should they come in and should us as policymakers find that is important. So, if Durham Youth Baseball makes that request, we don't have to allocate that right now. We already have that reserve account, that recreation account currently. What line are we
It's
at?
got 23,000.
23,000 in it, and so in the past we just haven't pulled from that,
Right.
and we budgeted separately. And so I think that if we've already got that money there, that's a good place to pull from for that personally.
Yep.
And so that means we can still meet that community need without having to budget additional funds this year. And to that point as well, I was looking through some of these accounts, and like same thing with we have the gazebo here, which has been we've received some emails from people in the community saying that they want us to consider doing something with that. We've got some. I think Calvin's had a couple people look at that, right, Jerry, to take a look at the replacement costs and fixing costs and stuff like that. But that really falls within a town building, and we already have that town building reserve account populated. And if we look here, what number is that?
Did that
77.
roll out of? the
77 real quick, Joe. The municipal public building capital reserves, line 77 on page 19, already has $90,000 in it. So those are expenses that we can draw from there should we get the feedback and people decide that they want us to approach that, you know what I mean? So we don't need to separate funds for it.
So let me just, so it's the actual,
It's 70,000.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
Sorry,
It's
70,000.
under 71.
Yeah, sorry, line 77, 70,886. And I don't
What
remember,
page are you on?
page
19.
19.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what the exact quote Calvin had said a while back, but it wasn't 70,000.
no,
It's expensive, but not 70,000.
But,
Yeah.
so my question is when we talked about the use of building capital reserve account, we had some ideas of what that would be for. Was the gazebo part of that initial estimation?
it's a municipal building,
Yeah,
so.
So-
So it's part, all lumped together?
yeah, and when the 10-year capital plan came out, that, if I recall correctly, that was really based off of like Public Works, Fire Department there and town buildings. And I remember that Calvin mentioned, you know, at some point something's gonna need to be done with that. So it was something that we had already expressed to the community is, you know, we understand
right,
that
I
we're building
remember.
capital there. And so I think that that's a good way to do that. So in my mind, while I think that these are really good services under community service donations, I think we already have capital set aside for it
Right.
in these other
So
reserve
you could
accounts.
tell Calvin to go do it now. You don't even need to
Well,
get to
if
town
the,
meeting.
I think if we all voted on it,
Yeah,
we could instruct Cal or talk to Jerry about, saying, the select board would be supportive of having something done there. Or I think we probably want options explored and presented to us.
yeah.
Do you want a separate article asking the towns?
That's what I was
Residents?
gonna get to, is that while we have money allocated, since we have this meeting coming right up, and since we've had a lot of people vocalize interest in it, we could say, does the community want the select board to pursue bandstand improvements during the upcoming budget cycle? Does that, Heather?
I think the important question to ask is about the actual preservation, right? Because we've been having the conversation about how a lot of that has already turned over and we're not actually preserving. I think it's important for us to know, like I think Calvin said when he was here, that the roof is original and pretty much every other part of that has already been replaced.
I think he said it was only part of the roof was original. but
I think those are important details, right? Because that is really gonna determine the type of the function of what ends up happening. Is it just a rebuild or an order and replace? Or are we actually attempting to
So,
preserve?
what-
And I think that needs to be fleshed out.
What if we asked the community if we wanted, we don't have to, but I think it's a good idea to ask is, do you want the, select board to pursue that? And what if that was a task assigned to the historic commission, or we stood up a committee, a gazebo refurbishment committee, and they could do that homework there and come to us and say, and I know it's kind of gets to death by committee, but there's a lot of really passionate voices about this. And so maybe that would be a good opportunity to get people's input to say, hey, there's nothing original here. What if we just take it down and put something of the same footprint there? Or, hey, we want to, put the roof on a new structure. Like, again, it gets that more input. Like,
So I think that building, that structure needs to be, something needs to be done with it. It needs to be done sooner. And with all due respects to those commissions, if we're looking for community input, we have the town election, we have the town meeting. We can put something with the ballots again, or have a tally sheet or something at the town meeting, or do an article at the town meeting. But I don't think we need to get more, I think we need to get this and see if people want to spend the extra money to try to revive what little is actually original, or if we want something that's gonna be in 150 years, is gonna be original to our times.
yeah.
Which, at that point will be just as important as that is.
Yeah, so I think what
So-
you're getting at is we have money set aside already. Why don't we just write some warrant language that asks, do you want this to be addressed,
Yeah.
the select board to
A, B,
pursue,
or C.
address this year?
Restore it or start from scratch and rebuild it and have it look the same.
Yeah,
Right.
And we
either
can hammer
do-
out that language after,
Yeah.
in February.
It would be
So-
good if we knew the current
Yes,
states.
we need to know what's original.
Right.
Like what
He
is.
probably knows that.
Calvin got that, and
Take some
I think we
pictures.
invite Calvin, or the next time he's coming to a meeting, we have Calvin tell us, and we can put it on the agenda and say, here, we're discussing it, and have people come in.
Yeah, I don't know if he can tell you what's original though, I think that's a
Well,
stretch.
I think the notes he sent
Right.
had an indication as to what was and wasn't original, and it was a lot less than people were
I
saying.
think he got an email stating that gazebo laid in a ditch for 70 years. So, take that for what it's worth. So, we can do our best to give you the information you want, but, I mean,
Go take some
Let's-
pictures,
let's-
put it
let's
on a
make-
slide, here's what we know. We'll put it at the town meeting, let people vote.
I think that answers the fiscal note question here, though. The other thing I wanted to talk about, so
That smells good, whatever
Yeah.
you're cooking, sorry.
The other thing I want to talk about here is, so if we look on page 19 and we just go through these reserves, there's a couple things that stand out to me. So telecommunication reserve has 88,500, and this is line 73, has $88,527 in it, and we don't have anything slated for what to spend that on. And it accumulates funds every year. And so, I think that we need to talk about removing that line and reallocating those funds to different reserve accounts. And so that won't have any impact on the cost of our budget, but it will then help put some money in some of those accounts. And that's where I think we can move some of that money to Durham Youth, to the recreation account. But I also think we can move money to the line 70 emergency reserve account, and that could be used as a contingency type line. I was looking at the Maine State statute, and it's allowable under Maine State statute to have something called a credit reserve account, and it can be up to 5% of your municipal budget, and it is in place to allow boards and commit the select board to allocate funds out of there for unexpected expenses in an effort to make sure that there doesn't need to be a tax increase. So somebody quits and we have to pay, or someone leaves and we have to pay unemployment, or some drastic thing happens and there's some funds that need to be brought up there. We have that already populated with $16,953. And if we took this, and I'm laying the idea out large right here, and then we can come back in on details. But if we took the 88,000 from our telecommunication reserve, line 37, reallocated some of that to our emergency reserve, and the rest, and some of it to our recreation reserve, we could build up a balance in those accounts and solve some of the contingency issues that we know exist, and also then have some money set aside for the community needs as they arise.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does the reallocating, does that get put before the voters to vote on?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
But I think it's important for us to tell them, like, we have this telecommunication reserve, and there's no plan for it.
Yeah.
And money gets put in it every year, and there's $88,000 in it. And so we can't give Durham Youth Baseball, we can't give a scholarship out of that telecommunication. But if we were to reallocate that where the community think is valuable, that gives us that opportunity to have that flexibility throughout the year.
Yeah.
And if we can go into the emergency reserve, and a perfect example there is if we end up having, some sort of opportunity come up, or if we need to manage something with cash flow, or we have an opportunity come up that we haven't, a grant opportunity that we haven't allocated funds for, that helps increase efficiency and decrease expenses, we could allocate money out of that. So I just think that there's some opportunity there.
So I don't remember what specifically that account is for, but I also think if we could use it for, connecting the Eureka Center with internet and that sort of technology, which is something we need to get out of this building and this space.
Well, separate to that, we have the Eureka account.
Yes, but to me, we're adding that for us, for the meetings, not for the building itself, because we made the decision to take our meeting space and use it as office space rather than expanding the building. So, the town office. So, when you first raised the issue, the emergency reserve account was where I thought the money should go. I do think putting some money into the recreation account is fine, but I also think some money should be left for telecommunication purposes, and specifically the Eureka Center, because I think, we're talking about improvements to that building, and multiple meetings about getting out of this building because it could interfere with public safety. We can't do that until we have that, and I think, if we have this money that is essentially revenue because it's not coming out of the taxpayer wallet, we should use it for that purpose.
We should be careful not to call it revenue, because it's not,
It's-
it's just allocating
It's
reserves.
allocating
Yeah,
revenue to this reserve account, money that comes in from the franchise agreement. So it's revenue that goes directly to this account.
well, I'm saying, like,
It's-
when
it's-
we allocate it out of the reserve, we should be careful just not to call it revenue, so, because it's allocation out of a reserve.
But, no, I'm talking about how the money gets in there. And the money gets in there from revenue we receive from the from the franchise fees. So it is, I think, but it doesn't.
I agree with that point. I think that, I mean, and maybe this isn't the time to have the conversation about what amounts are going where.
No, I think it is.
Oh, okay. I think that if we could accomplish the things that everybody's saying by doing, some to the emergency reserve, or if we're calling that, gonna name that something different. And then if that went into, if a lot, more went into the Eureka Capital Reserve, if we could use that for the upgrades that need to happen at
Yeah.
Eureka.
And so I've
but
done
not
s-
have to call that specifically telecommunications, because there's more than just
Yeah,
the telecommunication stuff that needs to happen over there to get that meeting space ready.
so I've done
Correct?
some math here already. To your point, Heather, and you said exactly what I was getting ready to say. So I think that it would be wise for us to bring the emergency reserve, take the telecommunication account, telecommunication reserve, which has an $88,000 balance. I personally would like to see us bring the emergency reserve up to $50,000. That would leave us with 30,000, or that would leave us still with, you can do the math, but it leaves us
50,480.
in the telecommunication
Yeah.
account, and then we can move some of that into the recreation.
Is that
and then
necessary though? Why, it already has $23,000 in there.
well, I'm just saying because it could fund for future needs and questions, because there's a lot of discussion right now about the recreation facilities in town, and so it just could earmark
Okay,
some of
okay,
that. I'm
okay.
not saying it needs to go higher, because last year we gave out 16.7. There's already 23,000 in that, so you could say put 0 in it, but then we could put the whatever the balance is after we square up emergency reserve into the Eureka capital. I'll get you, Joe.
Is there anything left that we need to pay for currently for out of telecommunications?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
How
So
much?
it's the server, $5,293.
so we should leave $6,000
Yeah.
So
in there in
really-
case.
So, right, so
Okay.
your real number there, instead of 88,527, is 83,233.
Yeah, but I don't want to bring it down to the line.
I'm just
I mean,
giving you the-
leave some money in there, leave $6,000-7,000 in there for the server, and that way you'll have a little bit left over in case something else comes up.
Yeah, if we left 6,000 in there to your recommendation, Joe, that would leave us with 82,527 to move around.
Yeah, or even leave 10 in there, because remember, you're doing an 18-month cycle here, so leave some extra money.
If we
you
just
need-
did 80,
Well, no, or whatever,
Well-
yeah, I mean, just leave some amount of money in there, knowing you're gonna pay 5,000 plus for the server.
So-
And then you might have to buy another server, whatever,
780 years.
What if-
7 or 8 year, but,
And
I
that
know it's
gets,
gonna refill,
so
like
that gets,
Josh is
yeah,
alluding to.
$9,700 of revenue a year right now. So what if we left that balance at 8,527?
Yeah, okay.
And then took that 80,000 that's available and then make the suggestion to
Allocate it.
reallocate
That's
it
fine.
to emergency reserve, recreation, and Eureka Center. And we can have a discussion about what those numbers could look like. What do you folks think about that?
I'm bored with that.
And so I would recommend bringing the emergency reserve up to 50,000, which would be 80,
I got 33,047 would have to move,
yeah.
okay?
So bring emergency reserve up to 50,000. And so, like you said, we'd have to move 33,807, you said?
33,047. I think.
And that would leave $46,000 left to put in Eureka Capital Reserve. And then, or some $46,000 left to split between Eureka Capital Reserve and, Recreation Reserve. And whatever folks think for that, because to your point, Heather, you know, last year, we gave out 16,700 there. It has $23,000 in the account right now, so there's enough if the same amount of requests were to come in.
The
The gen-
16,000 is all of that, so
Scholarship,
yeah, that. you
that
take
didn't come out of
10,000.
recreation.
No, that,
And the general assistance wouldn't come out of,
the general, so the only thing that came out of recreation was the 2,500 and the 1,100.
Right, so if we're giving out, you know, 3,600 a year, and that has 23,742 in it, there's, you know, 7 years of liquidity there at that rate, you know?
That's what I'm saying. I
So
don't
maybe
think
we
it's
don't need to add
necessary-
any.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think what's gonna happen at Eureka is more important than trying to put money in that account
So
when there's
do
plenty
we
in there
want to
for
put
that.
the rest of that into that, the rest of the amount after we bring emergency up to 50,000? So 46,953, put the rest of that into Eureka? Or do we still need to call out the general assistance?
I just
That's a lot.
have one question. So Eureka is a municipal building. So do you want to combine those into just one municipal building account? And then you can decide where you want to put your money into what building.
Personally, the answer for me there is yes, because I think having fewer reserve accounts makes it easier to track. But I could see the argument being that that's a space that serves the community a little bit differently. And so maybe how we allocate funds there could be different. I'm could be convinced either way.
And it doesn't matter.
Heather has her hand up.
Yeah.
My comment about that is that in terms of, efficiency, I think it makes more sense to do what you're suggesting. You know, because I'm always the devil's advocate. My only thing is that last year we went to the voters, we asked them specifically about putting money into the Eureka Reserve, and they voted in favor of doing that. And so I feel like
And you,
consolidating that, then let's say the roof blew off this building and we had to use all of it for that, the voters actually voted for that money to go to Eureka. That's my only,
That's a good.
that's a really good point.
Yeah, I'd rather just stick with keeping it in the, either adding to the, Eureka capital, keeping that separate.
So if the roof blew off the town office, would you be able to use the Eureka money to help pay for that?
No.
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 And so that's the one
That would
thing is
be-
like, I understand that
We'd
we
have to do
want to
something
fund
different.
improvements at Eureka, but if a true emergency does happen, our wants kind of fall down below our needs, and so maybe there is a value to just putting it into the building.
And they are gonna
Reserve.
revote. If we're gonna do that, they're gonna revote to do that. They have to vote to move that, right?
All it does is it just gives you more flexibility.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all. That's the only seat I want to play.
Josh, you were gonna say something after me.
I think that, I mean, we're getting close to emergency time with that building, and we need to decide if we're gonna put the money in it or not. And I think seeing this separate and deciding, to me, it's worth keeping separate, because frankly, we need to do something with that building, because I think we're wearing out our welcome here in this space, and we're not the only ones meeting here. And I think it's time for us to listen to that working group, and do something. And so I think we need to start taking that seriously, and I think there needs to be that dedicated account for that building, because I do think it's unique. And if an emergency comes up, then we can have that conversation again, but,
Well, in that case, do we have a motion to combine them? Because if not, then we can just keep it as is. So does anyone want to make a motion to combine Eureka Center to public, the other public works building, or the municipal buildings? Seeing none, let's keep it there. Okay, so what do we want to put for money in there?
I also don't think, what other telecommunications systems do we have other than the server? There's the systems here at the fire
Well,
department,
you have, you'll have laptops and computers to replace every
right, and so,
5, 6, 7 years, whatever they come, so.
and so I think, it's going to repopulate to some extent every year, but, this is I think leaving extra there for, is, again, to work on the telecommunications, which I think the next big budget item is to connect the Eureka Center, but that's not until we figure out what we're doing and how to fix the building so we can make it usable for the town needs. But, so I think leaving just the 8,527 is not the right decision.
So are you suggesting move the 33 to bring the emergency up to 50 and then leave the rest of it in telecommunications?
Yeah, or if you wanna move some to put the recreation account to a round number, 30,000, 35,000, but I think.
I mean, personally, I think that the Eureka situation is, I mean, it's gonna take us 7 years to get through that recreation budget. I don't see that as a priority.
To me, I understand the emergency reserve, but for me, the most important account we have is the Eureka Center, because that is something, I mean, God forbid what happens if they're having a public meeting in this space and then there's a fire and something happens, and are we affecting public safety? You know, I didn't realize it was such a concern until I went to that meeting a few weeks ago. I had never heard, and then, you know, this whole security thing here, which I never heard the chief mention before. To me, getting that Eureka Center ready for us to have these meetings, because I don't think it's, or we have to start looking elsewhere. And that's the school, and then the only other place would be AMVets, which I don't think will be practical for them to have with the number of meetings we have. Or say, hey, Calvin, we're gonna use your garage, get a heater, and, you know, when there's no snowstorms and you're not going out, we're gonna have meetings in your garage.
So I
Because
think
that's the only other place that's big
I think we
enough.
need to wait for that community visioning process to drive where we invest the money. And so I think that just at this midnight hour, arbitrarily, just saying we need to give all this money to Eureka Center. That's what happened with the doors last year. And then there was an argument as to whether we should actually do the doors this year after we added it last year. So I think that putting some money in there to help build it up with the anticipation that there is going to be a need there is important, but I do think we should bring up the emergency reserve because that is a big concern for me. And so if we bring that to 50,000, we just need to remove 33,000 from telecommunication. That leaves us with 46,953 in telecommunication that we could either move some of that to Eureka or some of that could stay there or whatever number there.
So if I were able to finish my thought process, I would have said, we move the money to the emergency reserve account and we'll leave the rest in telecommunications because, you know, it will be there and we can reallocate it when we have a better idea of where it needs to go.
I think leaving it in telecommunications though kind of puts a lot of constraints on it, whereas if we were to move it to a different account, that provides more. Like right now, if it's in telecommunications and you wanted to do a video monitor in Eureka Center, yeah, you can do that. But if you want to do anything else there, you can't. So I think that putting it in an account that allows more flexibility could be beneficial.
So move it to the emergency reserve, put another $20,000 in the emergency reserve, bring it up to $70,000. Then you can use it for anything you want.
I think that does give more flexibility for those big items that could pop up.
You leave $26,000.
For an emergency,
Yeah.
but, you know,
I don't know, or just leave it at $46,000.
Yeah, but like you just said, like, it sounds like you're declaring that Eureka Center could become an emergency. And so I think it passes the straight face test on that.
It would if we have to go jump over there for some reason that
Right.
that was deemed safety related or of that nature. We could, you know.
I just think the more we leave in telecommunications, the more it puts a really big constraint on what it can be used for.
and I think that's a good idea for the time being until we get an idea of what we want to use it for. Because I think there are things that it's going to be needed for, we don't know what they are, we don't know what they're going to cost.
So, do I have a motion to adjust the emergency reserve account?
So
Right.
moved.
No, I'm asking, you have to list the
I'll
motion.
make a motion to increase the emergency reserve account to $70,000, so that would move $20,000 more of the telecommunications reserve to emergency reserve. So you'd leave 26,953 in telecommunications, and you'd add 53,047
Yep.
into the emergency reserve.
Is there a second on the motion? I'll second it. So the motion on the table is to move $53,047 from the telecommunications reserve into the emergency reserve to bring that balance to $70,000, and that would leave $35,480 in the telecommunication reserve. Because if there's 88,000 in there, we move the
Well, there's not quite 80, there's only
88,527.
83,233 because
Am I looking at the wrong?
No, because the server has to get paid
Server
for.
needs to get paid for. We're gonna.
Yeah, well, I mean, but if we're leaving
Yeah.
35,480
Yes.
in
Yes,
in
yes,
that
yes,
account.
yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we would move $53,047 from telecommunication reserve and add it to emergency reserve.
to emergency.
Yeah.
And that's it,
Yes.
okay,
That's the motion on the table right now.
okay.
And there's a second. Do we have any other discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion? Any opposition? All right, and the motion passes 4-1. Okay, so Jerry, you just make that adjustment there. That gives that
Well,
little,
I'll have to write it in the warrant,
yeah.
yeah.
But so but will have to be reflected on the budget though, for the budget committee to see that transfer is proposed.
You do you have to do another list here for additions,
By the select board.
25, 26 budget.
Yeah.
Because we're voting to increase the account amount, but we're not voting to increase funds, it'd just be a transfer.
I think,
So we would
I
need to
think-
have a warrant article for the transfer, but
Right.
it's
I
not
think
part of the.
you would do it on this sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You would just do transfer.
Yeah, I'll work it out.
and
See, because I don't think the telecommunications budget reserve account is on this, but I think you'd have to add it.
and we have money,
I'd just say reserve accounts and not do capital reserve accounts and list all the reserve accounts.
Right.
And Jerry, in this current budget, where does the general assistance line live?
That's all,
It's other communications, page 8, line 69.
All right, as long as it's in there, we're good?
page 17,
17, or I have it on page 8.
yeah. And it's line 69, it's under other community services. Line
General
69,
assistance, yep.
$1,000.
See that right there. And this would, so right now, we have outside organization 16,100, that disappears in the 2026 budget, that's why that's a decrease of 100%.
Right.
On line 697807.
Right,
Perfect.
so that 16,100 is, you know, that, all that, yeah.
And as a, so we've covered, we know we have plenty of money now for the baseball, snowmobile club. You know, if the AMVets were to come and ask for a generator, we don't have funds allocated in a reserve account for that, but they haven't made that request ahead of this year.
No.
The
They
free-
replaced their generator
Right,
already.
right, but they replaced it, but they haven't come and made, I should have said if someone comes with another request like that. Now, the Freeport Scholarship, we haven't heard from anything from them, but if you recall last year, they were trying to build the principal amount of an endowment, and once they had that, they weren't going to have to fundraise, they were just gonna give scholarships out off of that endowment.
Correct.
And so if they haven't come and spoken to us, I imagine that means that they met that, and last year when they came and spoke to us, we made our budget timeline very clear to them, so at this point, like, we haven't heard from them. Their goal was to just get an endowment set up and then be done with it, so I don't feel like we need to really tap any money for that anywhere. And so that was the only thing that I had for changes on the reserve accounts, so.
Should we vote to put a warrant article on moving or paying the Durham Youth Baseball and the Snowmobile Club the requested funds from the Recreation Reserve account?
So, yeah, that's an option. We don't have to put that, but we do have the meeting coming up, so. Because right now, we can disperse those out of the reserve account without having to have a special vote on it.
So I would make that motion.
So your motion is to add a warrant article to,
To
distribute
move, to,
2,500 to Durham Youth Baseball and 1,100 to the Snowmobile Club.
yes.
Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second that.
Second from Joe. Any questions on the motion? Yeah, I was gonna say we don't have to, but when we have an audience, we might as well
It's not a bad idea.
do that and say, hey, so, all in favor? Any opposition? So right now, Jerry, warrant article to, ask if people want a gazebo, the gazebo addressed. We'll have to work this language out a little bit more. A warrant article to ask if, we can move, the allocated amount out of telecommunications into emergency reserve. And then a warrant article, based off of Josh's motion.
Yep.
My next question, and I know when it gets my rolls because I'm a little nitpicky, but Heather might have my back because you like nitpicky, right? So we have our current reserve account called emergency reserve, and in the legislature, in the state statute, they refer to this as a credit reserve account. Do we want to change the name of that emergency reserve to match what is listed in state statute? Because that, it just highlights in that is deliberately for an action that is an emergency, which, I can just read it off right here. I pulled it up earlier. Let me pull it up here.
What's it called? Credit?
Reserve account.
It's called the Credit Reserve. It's under Title 30A, Part 2, Subpart 9, Chapter 223, Municipal Finances, 5801, 3. It's credit reserve. It says provide a reserve which may be applied in periods of financial emergency to assist in continuing its normal operation without an increased tax rate. And then subsection A here says the annual appropriations for this purpose may not exceed 5% of the current tax commitment. And then B says when the municipal legislative body determines that a financial emergency exists, it may order the withdrawal of necessary amounts from the account.
Okay, well, that part of it says the legislative body has to determine that it's an emergency.
When the municipal legislative body determines, okay, that's true.
So that means that we would have
That's-
to go get a special town meeting to have them vote, right? Is that what that means?
Didn't that, it sounded like operation account, where we're talking about having money for emergency repairs and other things, so I think it could be
Well,
different.
I think emergency would just be defined that
Personnel.
anything that would require an increase in the tax rate to cover.
But the
Right, but I
legis-
think, my understanding of this reserve account as it sits right now is that if there's an emergency that happens during the year and money is not allocated for that emergency, then this money can be used for it. It's not money that's gonna be used to help lower the taxes.
Well, no, help
That's
help
raised.
prevent increasing the taxes.
Right.
Because
But-
if an emergency arose right now, and we didn't have anything budgeted for it, and we had to pay for it, we didn't have to go in the next year and ask to reappropriate money that we've already spent, correct?
So,
And that would be
and-
increasing.
And the intent of this reserve account is to say, hey, we have this money so we can cover this with money we already have and we don't need to raise any more money unless we want to add money to this reserve account by raising taxes. So I don't think changing it is,
If we don't, I just wanted to ask if folks.
Well, my only thing is that right now, we have the authority to spend money out of our existing emergency reserve if there's an emergency. If we change it to align with that, that says that the legislative
Well,
body, and then, so do we have to hold a special town meeting?
I don't
And they
think
have
so.
to vote to approve it?
I don't think so, because right now, at our regular town meeting, they're voting to give us the ability to expend out of reserve accounts without going to the legislative body, which is different, which we
But-
did for the first
I-
time last year.
I don't know if you can do that when, if you're following the statute, you're citing to the statute and the statute says the legislative body, I think you gotta follow the statute.
Maybe it's safer just to leave it as
What
is.
does it say, Joe, again?
Read B, that's the part that,
Is it to
3B?
raise it or spend
It
it?
says 3 says provide a reserve which may be applied in period of financial emergency to assist in continuing its normal operations without increasing the tax rate. And then A says the annual appropriations for this purpose may not exceed 5% of the current tax commitment. And B says when the municipal legislative body determines a financial emergency exists, it may order the withdrawal of the necessary amounts of the account.
Right. So the legislative body will determine if it's an emergency.
yeah.
And that is-
But in that same statute, it says, you know, just establishment of any reserve account. It says the municipality may establish a reserve fund consisting of one or more accounts by appropriating money or by authorizing the transfer of unencumbered surplus funds at the end of any fiscal year for the following purposes: capital improvements, capital equipment, credit reserve account. So it's a subsection of saying how you establish reserve accounts, in my understanding, and I could be completely wrong, so that's why I'm trying to bring it up. I'm not trying to fight or anything like that, is that if the town is already voting to give us the permission to expend funds out of these reserve accounts, which this is a sub part of that, part of the statute, then that would qualify. But if we don't feel like it's a concern, that's fine too.
So
I just wanted to bring it up, and if it's a no, it's no problem.
This is to assist in continuing its normal operation, so that means, this is for if we don't raise enough money to continue, not, which again, if we wanna have money in that account, that's fine, but I don't think the emergency reserve account, which is what we've talked about being used in cases of emergencies, I don't think we wanna limit it to just that use.
Okay, and that's fine. That's just bringing it up. All right, do we have any other questions or recommendations on the reserve and community budget information page?
Mine, I don't know if this is the page it would fall under, because I don't think it falls under any page. But when we're talking about these types of reserves, and I recall the Conservation Commission coming and asking for money to fix the bridges and whatnot, and we did give direction not to fund anything over and above what it takes to operate at normal service level. I'm just wondering, like, you know, my thing is that if we don't budget for anything that any of those that might come up, then where does that money come from when they come to us and ask for that stuff?
So I think
or
that
if they
would-
have any plans, or I just didn't see any of that reflected anywhere, and so I'm asking the question.
I think that would come from the recreation account, like in that example, because it's the bridges and the walking paths and stuff like that are recreation.
Right, which that's the answer for that example, but like,
Or like-
I'm just saying across the board. Like, if the
In-
solid waste committee needed money, where would we get that from?
And we don't have anything budgeted for that because we don't anticipate that they will have those needs. Because like if they need to print something, that comes out of our budget from the admin side already. If we needed to, if someone said, I want to fix if we want to fix up the building that's at the river park, that would come out of the buildings because it's a town building. If we wanted to do, someone wanted to go in and.
Okay,
to
I
have
don't
all
need
the
30
approval,
examples,
yeah,
I just wanted to make sure it was on
I
our
th-
radar.
I think that we have that covered through the other reserve
Okay.
accounts.
That's all
But
I have.
I think it's a really good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the budget? So, the process here is, Jerry, you can make those adjustments for us, and the budget committee wants to get a copy of it, email it to them Thursday. Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Yep, and we're also gonna provide them with, I think, printed copies, because they had referenced that the other night. And so all we're gonna provide them is this budget sheet in this format, which is a PDF file that will be emailed to them, and a printed version of this.
Can I have a process conversation? They make recommendations based on our budget, but we haven't voted to accept.
I'm
this.
talking about process, and then if we vote, this is
Okay.
how it goes. So I wanted to
Okay,
describe the process,
okay.
and then we can vote on the
Okay.
budget if that works. And so this is all I think we should send them, this and in PDF format, and and then print off a copy for them. In the past, people have asked for an Excel format. One of the challenges with that is last time that was handed over, people manipulated the numbers in the Excel format, and then we're now not comparing apples to apples. So someone had created their own column where they were doing their own calculations, and then they're like, well, based off my calculations, these numbers are wrong. And then everyone was like, oh, can I see what page is that on? They said, oh, it's my own calculations. And I think to just avoid that, if we're all working off of the shared same budget sheet, that avoids that. So does that sound
I'm fine
good?
with that.
Yeah, okay. And so that's the process. They're gonna do a review starting Tuesday of next week. I think it would be great if all of us who are available could attend that meeting. Jerry and I will obviously be there to answer questions. I think that if we're sitting here as a board saying this is our budget, they talked last night, I'll do a budget presentation, much like what Jerry gave to us, and then they can direct questions. If as the chair, I can't answer the question, or someone from the board feels like they could answer it better, I think then I can coordinate with that person, because like with Milt's meetings, he'll say, I have these questions, does anyone have this question? He calls on someone, they ask the select board chair. If the select board chair needs an answer from town manager, or a budget committee member, or a department head member, I think that we can facilitate it that way. But I would love to have us all there, if possible. Not everyone has to be there, at minimum I have to be there. But I would encourage everyone to attend Tuesday.
So if you're going to be, you have to post it, because you're all getting together.
Yeah, so does anyone
I
else?
plan to attend.
So you want to attend, Deb, are you?
Yes.
All right, so if there's gonna be 3 of us, then we have to post it, so, cool. All right, so that's the process. They sent us an email with the meetings a while back, so it's essentially this Tuesday, or a week from today, and then I think the Tuesday after our next board meeting as well.
10th, the following Monday.
The following Monday, yeah, I wrote them
It's
down.
right here.
Yep, oh, perfect, yep, following Monday, and so we can kind of have a meeting after our next meeting to see if we want everyone to still go there, so we can post that if that works, have a vote next meeting, so. All right, that all being said on process, do we have a vote on, we need to have a vote on this budget as amended?
I
So,
think we have to vote
Do you,
article by
do
article.
you wanna do article by article?
I mean,
That's
do we
fine.
not have to?
I
Okay.
think if you would be more comfortable with that, we can.
I don't care, I just wanna follow the rules.
Sure, let's do article by article. If we don't have any major changes, this is not on an issue.
If we don't need to do article by article, it's
I
fine.
think that's up to you folks.
Okay. If
So I'll make a motion that we amend the emergency reserve account, or Joe already made that motion, so we made that. So we've edited the document. And now I would entertain a motion to approve the budget as edited.
so moved.
Yep. I'm asking, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Perfect. So, do we have any discussions? All right, so, Deb?
I, again, would just like to thank Jerry and his staff for the work that went into this. I learned a lot myself going through it, and you did a great job presenting it the first time for us. I
Yeah.
really understood all the details, and the department head's input at our meeting that we had on this was very good, so just acknowledgement and a thank you for your team.
Yeah, and I think you did a really great job this year with these visuals. I think that's huge, in color to really see that. And then laying out the fixed cost versus where the where the non-fixed costs are, I think helps provide a lot of perspective when you realize, our total fixed costs are pretty locked in. There's not a lot of room here to make adjustments, so I think that was great. And I think that with our direction to you being, bring us back a, baseline, nothing new, with the exception of some more staff capacity for HR. When we said, bring us back a budget that has another HR person, and you said, hey, I figured out how to do it at a fraction of the cost with a consultant, that is a huge savings opportunity there, which I know I appreciate a lot, finding those opportunities even when we kind of gave you guidance to go further along. So I'm really happy with this, and I know it was a ton of work going through and figuring out the annualization part, so. All right, seeing no more discussion, all in favor of the budget as amended? Any opposition? So I will send, Jerry will get this ready Thursday, and I will send in from us as a board to the budget committee and have everyone CC'd on it, so. Perfect. Alrighty. Next on the agenda is new business, and we just have abatements to sign, and that was sent in our packet. Does anyone have any questions about the abatements?
I think we have to move to the Board of Assessors.
Oh,
before
yeah,
we
sorry.
have a
Do I have a
conversation
motion to
on
move
it.
into the Board of Assessors?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Joe moved it, I'll
All
second
right,
it.
second it. All right, all in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none? All right, we are now functioning as the Board of Assessors. So, new business, number A, an abatement to map 7, lot 79. Do we have any questions on that? It's just
You mean map 5?
sorry, map, I read that
Five,
wrong
so-
backwards. Map 5, lot 79. This is pretty straightforward, just an abatement amount of $147.90 from an acreage error that was calculated, so. Do we have any questions on that? All right, I would entertain a motion to approve the abatement.
Make a motion to approve the abatement for, what is it?
Map 5, lot
Map
79.
Map 5, lot 79, for $147.90, John and Christina Fake.
Perfect. Do I have a second?
I'll say,
All right, any questions on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposition? We're good. I'll sign it and pass it along. And so the next one is an abatement for map 5, lot 79. Oh,
That's the
sorry,
same-
that was the only one.
Yeah, that was.
Service agreement for animal control.
Got it.
That's the,
We need to
gonna
move
be
out of the Board
in
of
new
Assessors.
business itself.
Oh, yeah, we gotta
We
move
We need to
out.
move out.
Do I have a motion to end the Board of Assessors, exit the Board of Assessors meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none, we have moved out of the Board of Assessors. So we're back into our Select Board meeting. All right, so we have a service agreement here for animal control that needs to be signed. Jerry, do you have any extra info for us on this?
No, that's just a carry over from, town of Lisbon, they do our animal control services. And, that's just a service agreement, just extending to the 3 more years.
Perfect. So I have a motion to approve the service agreement as presented to us for animal control.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any question on the motion? All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none, that's going to pass. Alright. Where do we sign on here, Jessica?
Back.
It says
Oh.
inhabitants of Lisbon and date, signed, sealed, in presence of.
Doesn't have a page for.
Yeah, there's a page for us too, I thought, on there.
it doesn't
On
have
the
the
map.
names of us.
It doesn't have the names, it
Oh.
just says inhabitants of town of Lisbon, signed, sealed, and
That's
delivered in
us.
presence of,
That's us,
and the
yeah.
date, so.
I
There's
think
2
the
lines,
bottom-
do you want us to just
The
write our
bottom
name in
section.
and then sign? Cause there's 2 different,
The bottom one
Oh,
says
sorry.
inhabitants of Durham.
sorry, my bad.
Yeah.
Do you want Jerry to go while we're writing?
Yeah, and, I got nothing else here for new business, so manager report.
Okay, a couple of things. Next couple of meetings, we've got to get the warrant straightened out, so as because we're gonna need that signed and ready to go by the last meeting, right? February. So we only got 2 more meetings left to kind of review that and get it done. So I'll have a copy of it the next meeting for you to review. And then if there's any changes and stuff, you can do it through then. And then I'll have the final draft for you at the end of February. So, yeah, look, not much.
You can do a draft. The draft is what goes in the annual report.
Correct.
We don't need to do the final until after the report.
All right.
Speaking of that, when do you need, there might have been an email, when do you need the select board's, the board chair's report article?
February 15th. or
February 15th.
February
So I was gonna write that up, but I wanted to distribute it to the board prior, just to get some input, so I'll have that prepared before our next meeting for us to, talk about, in case I miss adding anything.
So that's gonna, you're gonna have to put that on the agenda.
Yep,
One other couple of things. Town office generator is installed. The town office generator.
when we had
We'll never
today,
lose power again.
Right.
Thank you.
You should put that out on blast.
yeah, that would be really great to put on the news blast, and on the
Right, because
Facebook
some of
page.
it's really-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do
because
it.
there was a lot of people really concerned about that, and especially tell about the good deal we got.
Yeah, I mean, it did come in on budget too. We paid $9,937 and then $3,000 back from MMA, so
Awesome.
that works out, so that's good. The other thing I want to mention is the youth doors are being installed as we speak, so that's, you know, when you look at that Eureka Center, there is some major problems. The sill that one of the doors sits on top of is just completely gone and rotted, so we had a scrape out 4 inches of it, because it was just raw. And then we put some pressure treated back in there to support it. But they look pretty good, so he should wrap up this week with the new doors. I don't know if you've been in there in a little bit, but I was in there today kind of talking to him, and if you walk in the front door and you kind of go over to the right and you look left, that whole floor dips down, and it's gotta be about 4 inches.
Yeah.
There are some major
need
issues
some
with that
help.
building, so.
Yeah, and like
But-
in that community meeting, Calvin pointed out that it's half of it's a stone foundation, and when it rains, water pours through the side of the building and then is absorbed in the dirt floor.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on.
No, those are the two good things that have been in the works for a while, and they're getting done, and that's good news. Yep.
Any effects to any grants we got with all the changes this week with our new administration in the
I
White House?
haven't really, and I think they're just on hold now until they.
There's a lot on hold.
There's a lot of on hold, and I think MMA sent out an email today. Did you all get? Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't read it, but yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Do we get any?
Do we, yeah, is there anything outstanding that we're gonna lose?
I think
I don't
since we
remember
spent
seeing-
down ARPA already, and that was already allocated,
Okay,
I'm not aware of us have any federal.
okay,
grants,
I
yeah.
saw a bunch of grants in the chief's report. and
The
other
big
things
question
that
will
were
be
out there.
though, is with education
Yeah,
and what that's gonna look like for
yeah,
their
that's
budget.
not gonna be pretty.
And what that would look like for us if there's a halt in anything there. So I know that MMA is paying a lot of attention to this, and I'd be interested to hear what the school has to
All
say
right, no, I
too.
was just curious if we had anything that we knew of.
All the more reason for the fiscal year change.
Yeah,
And that concludes my report.
awesome.
Thank you, Karen.
Board member reports, I just want to quickly say, the Agriculture Committee, I met with them at the beginning of the month, and they're up and running, they're really excited. They're already going through some internal facilitation of prioritization. They approved their own charter there, and we just got an application for another member because they need an alternate, and so someone just sent that in just today. So, really eager group of producers and farmers in our community. It was really great to meet with them all. So, I've got nothing else. Josh, do you have anything?
Just Calvin did a great, George did a great job with that downtown meeting he did last week.
Yeah,
I didn't get to stay for the whole thing, but I thought the part of his presentation that I saw was great. So thank him for me because I didn't get a chance to.
I'll pile on to that because I stayed for the whole thing and it was a really good exercise. I thought it was excellent, and I think I wrote you a note about it as well.
And it's cool that there's $15,000 more coming towards the downtown envisioning process with GP Cog, and I think that's really great to note because that alone right there almost doubles our investment in the GP Cog dues annually, which is huge. So,
Add that to your list of all the grant money that you're gonna
It's a total
tally.
of 23.
No, I mean,
Twen-
townwide,
Yeah.
all of them,
but,
add it up.
but just GP Cog alone, we pay $8,000 in dues, and we've gotten $23,000 from them. So I would love that sort of return on investment with my dollars.
And they do a great job.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah,
She did a good job at the meeting
she did a
too.
wonderful job, yeah.
It's
Everybody did, George did, Christina did.
She's a fantastic facilitator.
Yep, she is.
Heather, did you have
I
anything?
think Jerry wanted to say something.
Yeah, I did, so I sent you the informational thing. Y'all like that? I know
The 18-month budget?
Yeah. Did that make sense to you? Because what we're gonna do next is we're gonna print that out, and we're gonna give it to some of the folks at the window and kind of use them and ask them, read this and let me know if this makes sense to you before we send it out townwide. You know, because we want people to be able to understand it. We want to
And
give people.
I did send Jerry a change though, because in the top left
Yeah.
on the screen, it wasn't
The
a finished
sentence
sentence.
is gone,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think what's going on there is, there's been like 8 iterations of that. So that's a text box, so when you made the last iteration, you
Yeah.
blocked off that thing, and so when I got, because I didn't even pick that up, I was looking for the other edits that
Yeah.
I made. But,
And when that gets printed, so I think it's really important that we send it out through All Things Durham every week from the time it goes out to the time,
Yeah, to
I
the
mean,
town.
the Durham News Blast, sorry. Every time that weekly newsletter goes out, that should be in it every week up until the town meeting.
Okay,
An
so,
electronic version of it.
yeah, we can
And
do
then
that.
I think putting it, an electronic version of it on our town Facebook page is important too, on the town website. And if we can print some copies off and see if we can put them at the get-go maybe, and see if they're okay with that, because I just wanna make sure that everyone is getting access to this piece of information. Unless you had planned to mail it to every single person, but
and so that's another.
I thought
we're
you
gonna have
said
to
you
have-
were gonna mail it to everyone.
We are gonna mail it to
yeah,
everyone.
but, oh, sorry, yeah, but regardless, I think that having it in all those places is gonna be really important, because there's been a lot of complaints about mail and stuff like that, so.
We're gonna have to write a warrant article to get the town to vote on when the new town meeting will be, so. The
Yeah.
reason why we picked this second,
Well, so we want to align it with the RSU 5 school budget election, so then we can piggyback onto that ballot the municipal officers. And because we do go back to the town meeting, we just have to have the municipal officer election within 14 days of town meeting. So we can have the election on that Tuesday with the budget referendum, and then have the town meeting on that Saturday.
Perfect.
right, so that's why we
Good.
picked that date.
Yeah. I thought that was good, the second as opposed to later in the month, because you get it, sometimes you could get close to like a 4th of July weekend, or something like that, being right at the end, you know, so people's vacation time. June's a tough time because everyone wants to be outside, but
Yeah, and we may have another opportunity where GP cog could put you and I in front of a camera and a teleprompter talking.
we should do
about
that, yeah.
It can be a video, and we can,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they'll help us with that if we're interested in doing that as well.
Absolutely.
So, working on that as.
Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Deb, did you have anything to add?
Just that I also attended the community event for the space, whatever it's called. And there was a lot of good involvement from community members. Not only was it facilitated well, but all the community members basically spoke about their ideas. It was a really
I didn't realize-
well-facilitated
Chicken down,
session.
sharing my drawing.
I didn't realize how many people got married at the Eureka Center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
So I just say that. I also wanted to just acknowledge in the chief's report, he had a lot of good things in here, but this inspection that they did, that he said passed with flying colors and now it's a 4-year. I mean, a number of us can understand the issue of somebody coming in and auditing and inspecting and how important that is. So just acknowledging that piece, although there was a lot of good things. I did attend the recent training, the required training that you suggested. It was an online thing. I think it was this week, I can't remember, but I did attend that, so you'll be getting okay. And we need to make sure the next February meeting for the Solid Waste Committee is in the books, in the records. I know,
Like scheduled,
is
is it the second Monday?
I'm not sure what the date is.
That's what he told me when I met.
Okay,
He
so
said it
good.
was always the second Monday of the month.
Okay, so as long as we make sure we get it in the calendar.
That's the same night as the budget committee meeting.
can someone do
right there.
Eureka?
Oh,
Yeah, we can.
They can do Eureka as opposed to here.
yeah.
Yeah, because that's a meeting that isn't currently required to be recorded.
You'll have to choose which one you want to do.
Is this the role that I'm playing? I mean,
What?
isn't the chair?
Well, don't you attend the solid waste?
You're gonna have
I
to
do,
pick-
but I have not been taking ownership of leading anything there. I've just been attending.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what your role is, you just want
Yeah,
to.
we-
Right.
Yeah, like as a liaison, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you can choose which one you want to go to.
We want you at the budget meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, for me to attend, I see,
Right.
yes,
Right.
okay,
So you can-
okay.
But your training thing made me think, last night, the budget committee was asking about FOA training, and so could you send me the link to the FOA? We talked about the FOA document that you have to read and sign off on. If someone could point me to where that lives, I just wanted to send it to them, to have them do that,
right
so. They said last night that they weren't going to do any FOA training until they were told explicitly by us to do FOA training, so I just wanted to send that along. But, and it is a requirement for all elected officials to do it. They made it
And
very.
that's a valid way to do it on that day.
The challenge though is last night, they made it very clear that they don't need to get our permission or ask us for anything. And they don't feel that they need to do FOA training until they get that instruction from us, but they don't think that they should get instruction from us. So I'm at a loss as to what they want, so I'm just going to send them the FOA training and say this is the requirement for
Yeah,
state law.
I mean, I just quickly pulled up they're mentioned with municipal officers, clerk, treasurers, assessors, and budget committee members. So they're required to do it.
Right.
Planning board too.
Yeah, and they did claim that they weren't on that list.
Yeah. And then we've never done
Okay,
it
okay,
before.
okay, okay.
So we just gotta send it along, you know. So I'll send that along and that's it, so. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none. That's unanimous.
Joe, did you have a board member report?
He already gave us.
No, I just
Yeah.
piled on and
All right, upcoming.
Josh mentioned.
Yeah.
Good.
Perfect. Upcoming meetings, budget committee meeting February 4th and February 10th at 5:30, at 6:30 at the fire station. Planning board meeting February 5th at the fire station at 6:30. That's gonna be open for public comment on the contract zoning in the Durham Historic District, or the Historic District Commission's changes. Select board meeting February 11th and the 25th, and Historic District Committee meeting February 13th at the Eureka Center at 6 p.m. And is there any need for an executive session? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion to adjourn.
Deb, do I have a second there?
Second.
Heather? Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none, we adjourned at 8:56 p.m. I'm gonna go steal some, whatever they're cooking over there in the whole.
Thank you.
You're out.
So then I'm already.
I